So today on the Growth Hack, we're super excited to be talking about building businesses that actually scale. The reality is that there's a lot of talk about scaling, but when it actually comes to living it, it's not that easy. So my guest today is Greg Head, who's the founder and CEO of Scaling Point. Greg has had a successful career over 30 years in the software business. He's been a part of multiple startups and growth stage companies, 3 great companies. We're going to talk a little bit about those today, which have all created over $2 billion in total revenue in the CRM software industry. He's advised hundreds of startup founders as a consultant, advisor, and board member. So before starting Scaling Point, Greg was the chief marketing officer of Infusionsoft, where he helped grow the company from $15 million to $100 million. Greg was also the co-founder of SalesLogix that went public in 1999. And it was also bought by Sage PLC in 2001 for $300 million. An early employee and a product manager of Act, the best-selling contact manager. I used to use it back in the 90s. It was amazing. And it was used by over 4 million salespeople in the 90s. Anyways, with that being said, Greg, thank you for coming on here today. I really, honestly, I want to learn more about you as a person, CMO, and entrepreneur. So you got in early in this tech world. Walk us through the genesis of kind of your entrepreneurial story and how you got into this world.
Well, I wasn't, thanks for that introduction. I'm happy to be here, Cameron. That's pretty long-winded. It means I'm older than the average person in this industry. I've been doing it for 30 years and, I've had lots of adventures. And now I'm not on the operating side running the businesses and growing them. I help the crazy entrepreneurs all over the country who are creating new things, and still addicted to that game and help out here. I didn't grow up as an entrepreneur. Some people sell baseball cards when they're 4 years old.
Sure.
And their business is in high school. I'm from Chicago. I went to University of Iowa, studied economics, and had a usual thing, and came back to Chicago in the late 80s. Didn't know what I really wanted to do, didn't feel comfortable in a suit. And a friend of mine said, hey, work with me at Egghead Software, which was one of the first software retailers. For people of a certain age, they remember when software was in a box, and Egghead was one of the fastest growing. It was really the moment that software in a box and the software industry just started to grow, right? It was early, it was misfits only. So I didn't know it, but I knew how to get into early industries before it was obvious, when it was only the crazy people. And so I just managed to hang on. I fell in love with all of it, growing companies, and I've done almost everything in the business except code in the software business. So I did it, I did it in the 90s, I did it in the 2000s, I did it in the 20 teens, and, in a bunch of different eras. So some things are changing, obviously, massively changing, and other things are not, about the game and about marketing and the entrepreneurship game. So that's been fun to sort out. So I just love the adventure, and I believe that all the stuff that we see every day and use that didn't used to be there comes from the crazy people like you and like all your people on the podcast here. They're saying it's small and nobody's doing it now, but someday people will do it. And so I help those entrepreneurs achieve their crazy visions.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, we talk about shiny object syndrome a lot because, like, if you go back to the 90s and even early 2000s, and when we talk about advertising technology and marketing technology, there wasn't a lot of tools. It was kind of like a group of them that it's like, these are your go-to kind of tools. Yeah. And so as things have scaled forward, now we're, I looked at the recent the Lumascape of the Martech Lumascape, and it was like went from 150 tools in 2011 to like 8,000 tools in 2019. So what's interesting is, like, we kind of live in this ADD kind of world, and we have this shiny object syndrome. We kind of go after the latest and greatest tool, and there's a plethora of tools available to us. And I know you came up with this analogy, when we talk about actually scaling a business, of moving from an ADD kind of world to OCD. And what does that look like for you? What does that look like at Scaling Point and everything, as far as moving from ADD to OCD? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, it's just a way that I use to describe the universal realities of the two ends of the spectrum. Starting up and getting up and running a local small business, I call that ADD. And it's mostly just the survival mode of running around and selling customers and saying yes and building products on the fly. It's seeing what works in the world and all that kind of stuff, which requires some experimentation. It requires making payroll. It requires trying a bunch of stuff and seeing what works. So if I look inside startups, any company that's less than 5 or 10 million for the most part, you get in there and agencies like yourselves are notorious. What do you guys focus on? Well, we do all of these things for all of these people, and they don't want to uncheck any box. So I just go, and that's okay. That's a way to create a business. It's a way to survive and get customers and make it happy. The problem is that everything at scale, not just growing another 20%, and you just email harder if you want to do that. But if you want to go national, if you want to raise funding and ring the bell, if you want to be nationally known, everything that we see that's nationally known, celebrities, politicians, tech companies, and the rest, at scale, super scale or just national in their industries, is known as the best at something important for someone specific. It's actually an OCD, meaning a specialization. They say no to most things. And in the beginning, you got to say yes. And so they're both sports that entrepreneurs have to play. And this is the trick. You actually have to go from ADD, the early experimentation, to the OCD, the focus. And so show me anything that's up at scale. Lyft that's going public this week, and Uber, all the tech companies, musicians that fill stadiums, new foods that we all eat, quinoa or whatever. And I'll show you in the beginning, Amazon, that's everything to everybody. But in the beginning, it was just books just online, and just was narrowly focused, actually so narrowly focused that nobody believed they'd go anywhere. So, and they knew they would. So, and before that, they looked at every industry and said, what can we put in a box and sell? And they decided on books. So there's the ADD and the OCD. So it's just, so true. So it's just a struggle to get through it. So, and you have to play both sports at the same time.
Yeah.
So challenge for entrepreneurs. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so how, tell us a little bit more about that. So then, because it sounds to me like, what have you noticed as like a common blind spot then for these smaller businesses? Because you're right. I mean, there's so many of these businesses and startups that get to a certain inflection point, and they think scale, like let's add more resources, add more people or whatever. But like, what is that common blind spot then that is causing these people either to have an issue with scaling or growing overall? Like what does that look like? I mean, what are those common blind spots?
Well, and they're common blind spots because entrepreneurs are just as human as our buyers are human out there. So this is a brain-to-brain problem, and it's interesting because the smartest entrepreneurs have the problem the most. They're most capable. They work harder. They have more resources. They stir people up for. So the myth is that whatever gets you to $1 million or a couple million in revenue is the same activities that it's going to get you to 5 or 10 and beyond.
Right.
Actually, different sports, the ADD running around sport of getting up and running and surviving, which you've got to survive, and the scale sport are very different. And I like to use the analogy of the chefs who can cook any kind of food, right? So these are talented entrepreneurs and superhuman, very smart people. They can make any kind of food. A chef can make any kind of food,
right?
Thai ice cream and Italian and whatever. They just can do it. But a restaurant is one kind of food in one place for one audience that the CEO doesn't make.
That's right.
And the restaurants that scale nationally are known for one thing on the menu: just organic burritos, just coffee, just quick burgers, right? McDonald's.
Right.
And they all came out of restaurants where they sold all kinds of food. So I just wanted, that's the thing that people who haven't been back and forth between startup and scale multiple times never see, that the scale game is actually quite different. So investors call that that inflection point product market fit.
Yeah,
but
sure.
It doesn't make much sense to entrepreneurs in the firefight, like the good ones that are onto something and someday it ought to be big. It's just not very useful.
So then, you're talking really diving into specialization, because it's like doing all things for all people versus actually just getting dialed in
Yeah.
And so the benefits of specialization, what are the key benefits of specialization? I mean, and so how can, like, if we're a startup, I mean, we're
Yeah.
we're a 9-year-old startup, but I
Yeah.
mean, we work with we mentor a lot of tech startups all the time. So, what's the one thing that they can do to hone in on what their specialty is? Because you're saying, like, right out of the gates, this is what you did really well. And then, like, once you kind of get into your specialty of, like,
Yeah.
tell me more about, like, what are those key benefits of specialization? Like, how do you hone in on that?
Well, there's a couple tricks there. But so the first thing to say is that, show me a company that's up and running. Congratulations, you're making payroll, you're doing great work and all that. I'll show you a company that has some ADD, that it's not very specialized yet. The reality is that everything that scales, restaurants, politicians, musicians, technology, consumer products, food products, whatever, things that scale, is known as the best at something important for someone specific.
So
So the
true.
specialization is a requirement of scale. All the things that you know in marketing about scalable marketing tactics, not just running around town selling to your friends and
Hmm.
and other things that don't scale, but things like advertising, word of mouth, product virality, PR storytelling that spreads, advertising that's efficient, partnership channels that scale. All of those really require specialists. Only specialists survive in those games. So
Yeah.
show me a full stadium that people are paying $500 for tickets for a musical act, and I'll show you they play the same dudes even though they could play anything
Yeah.
else. So it's required there. Um, so Cameron, just to even back up, not
Yeah.
everybody wants to scale. I mean,
Yes.
you have a great business. It's really good. It's kind of the crazy people that say, being the best in Dallas is not enough. I want to go national. And
Sure.
that's the myth. What worked in Dallas selling to your friends is not the same thing. So show me a national agency, for example, and I'll
Hmm.
show you that they're specialized in one thing for one crowd,
That's
right?
awesome.
And
Yeah.
so because when people look around like that one crowd, they ask each other, who should I get for this? Only the specialists that say, I just do this just for these people, show up at the top of their list. So Google is mirroring how our brains work. It's not how.
So, I mean, and I agree. I mean, you have to ask yourself as a business owner, it sounds like. So what I'm hearing you say
Yeah,
is, as a business owner, are you okay with incremental growth? And that's fine. If you like, if you can always do incremental growth. But if you really want to get to the exponential side of scaling a
yeah,
business, then your mindset has to shift, right?
yeah,
And I know you talk a lot about, part of that, I think a lot of people that haven't gone through it and they're first time entrepreneurs, they think in order to scale, then it comes down to capital and raising funds and everything. It's like, no, if I just get more capital, if I can just get, it's all top line sales growth, and they just want to burn through
yeah,
VC's money and everything else. They see it as a capital play.
yeah.
I'm curious, like, what's your, how important is raising capital and scaling? And give us a little bit of your insights on, around raising capital and going down that path of, like, there's a lot of different ways to raise capital now as well. So, like, how important is it in scaling your business first?
Well, there's a lot of different options, and it depends on the kind of business you have. Most services businesses and service businesses that can scale beyond, the rock star team that does amazing service locally, uh, most of them don't raise funding. And to be honest, most software companies aren't externally funded these days. They come out of service businesses or are self-funded. And there's such a variety of kinds of companies and kinds of funding. So there's been explosion in, like, startup and VC funding and all that. In the early
Yeah.
90s, those weren't words that anybody used, and they
Right.
certainly weren't cool. It wasn't where the action was, all that kind of stuff. But now everybody's doing it. So, and there are a lot more levels and a lot more options too. So the problem is entrepreneurs who are growing real businesses and want to keep growing and make a major impact in the world, for instance, or create a more valuable company. They actually have to know kind of what game they're playing. The Silicon Valley super VC, shoot the moon, unicorn, billion-dollar company is actually 1% of 1% of 1% of all the tech startups out there.
Sure.
Right?
Exactly.
So, but that's what everybody sees because there's a big business model behind it. Most companies are so you got to pick the right kind of funding. So I deal with a lot of entrepreneurs all over the country, and when they're onto something and it's starting to go, then like literally self-funded or whatever, then they say, now I need funding. The first thing is let's hold on there, keep going like you're doing, and figure out what kind of game you want to play. You want to get the right funding founder fit, right? If you race in, just like racing into all those tech marketing software technologies and just say, I'll take one of those and two of those and three of the, like you have to think about it hard. So
Sure.
entrepreneurs really need to think about what kind of game they're trying to play. And there's a bunch of games, how far they can go without funding, which funding matches the game they're trying to play. It's a major mistake if founders get the wrong kind of funding. I really wanted to create this kind of business. The market isn't so huge, but I raised money that says it needs to be $100 million company really fast.
Right.
It's just, that's where the problem is. It really works well when you have the right fit, if that's what you're trying to create or the rest. So there's a lot of naivete. By the way, there's a lot of naivete with investors too. They think all the companies are the same. They're not the same.
Right.
A lot more money than ever and a lot more startups and a lot more confusion. That's a problem. Generally speaking, I recommend don't raise money now, gut it out so you can figure out the game. Do enough due diligence on them as they're doing on you.
That's really good insight around funding. So I'm curious on this because, we hear a lot about in the tech startup world, but just overall as an entrepreneur, there's a lot of people that are starters and there's a lot of people that are builders. But as far as sustainers and actually they can get it to a certain level. And then I think that they're like, okay, well, I got it to here and now they're kind of out, but they don't really want to maintain. So there's that inflection point that I hear with a lot of different, I've heard it with multiple. It's funny, like just in the last couple of weeks, I've sat down, had coffee with a couple different people, and it's like, hey, I'm a really good starter, or I'm a really good builder, but then, they get to this place and then they built it to a certain level and then they're like, I'm not the person to scale it. So do you see that is that always the case, or is that where they need, kind of regime change where these people can either take it to the next level and, cross that chasm or get it to maturity or whatever else? What does that look like as far as, because we talk a lot about people and the founders and everything else and where that goes. So tell me, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a great question. And I've been through 3 companies that have gone from the table of us creating a company or the 10 employees of ACT or less than 100 in Infusionsoft to 500 employees, right?
Yeah.
And all phases of life. And we did the scale thing and created global brands. The sport changes as you grow a company. Cameron, if you had 200 employees, you'd have a very different world that you
for sure.
Right. Or the one-man band to the 10, to the 50, to the 200 and 500. Maybe those are the inflection points. So careful what you ask for, by the way. If you want to grow a big company, you have to deal with that. But there are different sports you play along the way. So what I would say is, I don't think that entrepreneurs are genetically programmed to play a particular sport. I can only play football. These are good athletes. But nobody ever explained to them that as the company grows, as the market matures, as crossing the chasm described, right?
Sure.
The game changes. So you actually need to be a good athlete and then stop playing that game and now play this game and stop playing that game. So like a public company is very different than the early phase of growth, is a very good, than the early stages of ADD turning into some scale and going up that thing. So most founders can actually make the shift, but here's the challenge. Most founders can replace team members along the way to get people who've done it before, and then you get the next team,
exactly.
Right? But they're there the whole time.
Absolutely.
They actually have to accept the fact that they have to do the work to change themselves to be a different person. Mark Zuckerberg is not the same person he was when it was 10 people in a room and he was the chief coder.
For sure.
And he's done it all the way. So Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, they all did it, and they're human just like everybody else. They just knew that's the sport they were playing. So it's an extra challenge, by the way, for founders in a growth company.
Sure.
That they have to get a lot of help
And something that I talk about a lot with people that I just mentor is delegating and saying offloading. Here's like my best use of my time, and saying I really like doing this. I'm really good at it, but at the same time, like, is it the best use of my time? Life is all about time and resources, and there's only so much time in the day. And if you're ever going to scale, you got to be able to delegate. So I hear you on that as well.
To me, I think it's interesting and ironic that entrepreneurs say, I'm just this way. By the way, I've seen like 1 million people figure out how to delegate, and it's figure outable. Right? It's figure outable. It's not obvious. It's just figure outable. Yeah. So they say, I'm just this way. And then they go create things in the world, and they say, well, I can't believe the world is like this. Someday the world needs to be like this that I'm helping to create. They want everybody else to change, but they say, I'm just this way. How about giving up the thought that I'm just this way and say, and now I delegate, and I got to go figure that out. No, that's what growth. It's a growth game, letting go of something and being the next thing. That you don't have. It doesn't have to come from your DNA, right?
Yeah. So you talk a lot about kind of the specialization and kind of building these little factories, and we had a little chat before about this, and what I found it really fascinating, and it really stuck with me because at the end of the day, like, I mean, I run a very creative agency, and we're not necessarily, I'm just using me as an example in this. How do you achieve scale and still be creative around being a specialist over here, but then also, creating a factory at the same time?
Well, that's a really important question. And any CEO, founder, owner of a business, faces this. What do I like to do? What did I get started? How does it work with clients currently? And what am I trying to create in the world? Totally. So certainly you could run around and say, hey, you have a problem, we could help you with that, right? So that's a little bit of the ADD. But you say, digital marketing, creative strategy, agency thing. The challenge is that in the long run and in the modern world, specialists eat generalists. You're out there saying, for all the marketing things, yes, we could do all that. And for all the industries, we could do that. Somebody who does SEO and Facebook ads and Instagram ads and influencer marketing and PR is going to kick your butt for that thing. And by the way, your clients say, I just need the best in the world for healthcare that does Instagram, right?
Yeah.
And those are the ones that are scaling. So I know most of the agency owners I know are really smart people, marketing people like me. They say I'm creative, which means I like to work on a lot of things. They're kind of setting a plateau level for their company that only people I can build a relationship with locally that like me more than the best of the world at their thing for them. It's a certain kind of business. So it's actually kind of programmed into the creative. These are really smart people. My dad was in the ad business in the Mad Men era. So I grew up with that kind of stuff, right?
Right.
Fun to work on a lot of kind of businesses and a lot of kind of things. But the problem is, and by the way, specialization isn't just, hey, got to do it. It's what everybody does. It's the reality that if you want to keep growing, we only line up for specialists that are the best in the world for us.
Right.
If you have a knee problem, you don't hire your general practitioner, you hire Tiger Woods' knee doctor, right?
That's right. Absolutely.
I mean, and Tiger Woods' knee doctor makes the most money in medicine. So if you show me something that's massively successful, I will show you that they got there by being the best at something for somebody.
Right.
Which isn't everybody. So okay, you can create a great $5, $10, $20 million agency. The problem is it's not going to scale, and the specialists are coming to eat you.
That's right.
If your best customers are the healthcare and you do all their websites, there's a healthcare specialist for just the senior care that just does the websites that has done 1,000 of them.
Right.
That your customer is going to choose. Chick-fil-A makes chicken sandwiches. They have no monopoly on chicken sandwiches. Everybody else makes one. And when we think of, let's have a chicken sandwich, not a burger, everybody thinks Chick-fil-A.
Right.
And the Richards Group in Dallas, created the cow.
Yeah.
The mascot is the cow. So they're defined by what they're not. We drive by all these other chicken sandwiches restaurants to go to Chick-fil-A, and it's about to be the 3rd largest fast food chain in the country. They have no monopoly on it. Their magic trick is just chicken sandwiches. So the marketing requires specialization. If the question is marketing, the answer is specialization.
Totally. I love that.
How you get there is you have to run the ADD experiments to figure out what you can specialize in.
I love that. And
Yeah.
so at the end of the day, you're defining what you're not. I mean, I think that is such a,
In the minds of the market. So it's not what you can build.
yeah,
It's what you can be known for. This is the marketing problem. It's been there forever.
right. I
So,
totally agree.
and the reality is, because we assume that if they only do that, they're the best at it. And they've built the best in the world factory for chicken sandwiches. And by the way, the Chick-fil-A factory for chicken sandwiches, they serve more people every day than McDonald's in every store. They do 50% more same-store sales. It's just chicken sandwiches, and they're not open Sundays. They do chicken sandwiches really, really well. And they do a lot of other things, service and all the rest of that. So we ascribe the best as the specialist, just like your Google SEO. If you're saying 25 different things on your homepage, your Google will never recognize you. They only recognize the specialist.
Hyper-focused.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, that's just something we preach all the time with our clients is like, you know, if you try to be all things to all people, then you're no one to anyone.
But you narrow it down, but it's still kind of in the matrix, many things to many people, and the specialist will come get you. So this is just decide what kind of game you want to play. You can have a great business running around with really smart people and do very creative things and all that. It might be vulnerable to specialists by industry or by the function that come and take pieces of your business. And the big agencies in town are all getting eaten alive by national industry specialists.
Sure. You're exactly right. You're spot on. And I think that, you know, we're talking specific agencies. I mean, this is applicable to any company. And that, so couple last questions for you. There's this whole notion around premature scaling. Startup Genome project called it premature scaling happens when entrepreneurs start focusing on one dimension of the business and advancing it out of sync with the rest of the operation. And so I've seen this multiple times where I was curious if you're familiar with this term around premature scaling, and have you seen that? Has that been a big issue with a lot of companies?
Well, yeah, that's a little bit, yes. And there's a bunch of ways to describe it. I know the Startup Genome folks, and actually helped them in Phoenix here because I managed a list of all the software companies in Phoenix, 416 software companies, and I know most of the CEOs. So I'm actually know the volume of entrepreneurs and all business owners, not just the success stories over here in the corner I'll read about. So yes, and some of that is in the ADD and OCD. They're trying to just add water to do more of what got them started. So the myth of more, it doesn't really work, and it gets really painful. And then you do more to go faster, and then you kind of get stuck. So that's one thing. The other is, growing a company is a great adventure. It's a wild puzzle. It's really interesting. And there's people and operations and product and service and financials and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes you got good bicep muscles and no leg muscles. So some things get out of scale, or some team members get ahead of others. So yeah, it's a really, it's a really exciting puzzle. It's a very challenging puzzle. It's a reason why most companies don't do it. Most one-person companies never get to 10 employees. Meaning like 1% of them. And 1% of 10 employee companies get to 100. So the biggest thing is in the tech world and the rest is saying, I have some idea and people are buying it, and 3 people like it, therefore I need funding and let's go. You actually have to go through the game.
That's right.
And not die in the process. That's why survival mode and ADD, you actually have to stay over here to survive long enough to find the thing that will scale. So show me Chipotle, just burritos, Chick-fil-A, just chicken sandwiches, McDonald's, whatever. And I'll show you that they all start with a restaurant that was around for 30 years that sold everything. And they didn't die in the process. So they had to experiment over here, and eventually the thing went. So,
so is there I mean, just let me ask you, so Scaling Point, like you're the CEO of that company now. So like is that something you guys do? So, I mean, if anybody wanted to reach out to you specifically or anything,
I work directly with founders, and I'm building a team to do this. I'm writing the book, and we'll have more content about these. These are, I spend time with 20 CEOs a week, and so I consult and advise with the crazy founders who say I'm onto something and someday it'll be big, but and I tried more of everything and that didn't work. Something deeper is going on. And
That's
so
awesome.
there's a puzzle in there that includes the entrepreneur, what's happening in the world, and all of that. And a lot of times in the tech business, I work with category creators that say, here's a new thing that didn't exist. Someday everybody will be doing it. And in the service business, typically they're not creating new things in the world. They're doing it for different groups.
Yeah.
And there's leverage in your category. There's leverage in your customer. And there's a structure to this game, just like there's a structure to music and sports and the rest. So Americans look at rugby and we just think it's a random people running around, scrumming and all that stuff.
Right.
But, there's a deep rules and art to it, just like we know in our sports and all that. So I'm an expert in that. I'm a knee doctor for pro sports athletes there. The early stage companies, the 1 to 5 million, who say someday it ought to be big. And part of what's in their head is, I want to be big and change the world more than I want to be right about what I am today. And I'll do the work to do it. And that's, it's entrepreneurs creating that. By the way, the world doesn't do that to you. You actually have to choose.
Yeah.
The world doesn't say,
Right.
I just want the world doesn't go to a restaurant and says, you ought to start a restaurant with just the chocolate pie that you make.
Right.
Nobody's suggesting it. More is what the myth, everybody's got it.
Sure.
The entrepreneur has to go, I could probably make a restaurant, like everybody loves that pie, but not all pies, but just this one. And I bet I can make a restaurant just around that pie. That's actually the counterintuitive kind of thing. And
you're so true. I mean, and again, if you can whittle it down to that one thing and be known for that one thing, then, that's what people are going to go to you for. And it's like, you have to go get that chocolate pie there.
That's actually the game of scale and be known for one thing.
So
there's always a better business inside an existing business. Cameron, we talked about it. In this corner, these are the people, they line up for you. You can serve them better than the rest. So already the question is, why are you doing all this other stuff? What could you start to move and be known to that? And it's really hard. And people send me examples all over the country of people who just do Instagram,
right?
Just for consumer brands.
For sure.
Right? Or I just do this just for this. And they actually have 80 people doing it.
I know.
It's really profitable, and people are lining up, and they have to turn people away, and they can just have the right customers and not say, I need this customer that will suck, even though because I just need to make payroll. So I'm just saying.
I know. I think that's so true. Again, it's funny because we talk with other agency folks all the time.
Yeah.
And everybody's solving a lot of the same problems, and at the end of the day, you've brought a lot of wisdom, I think, to the table today. Just on how to scale and be hyper focused, and the specialization versus building factories. So that's awesome. And I just want to let everybody know, from Greg's also got a basically, for if you're trying to raise money, 100 questions that serious investors will actually eventually ask you. You've got a whole thing on a pitch deck and explanations and tips, and there's a lot of tips and tricks in here. I looked at this PDF. I was like, man, this is great. So scalingpoint.com/PDT. And I'll put that in the show notes here too.
It's actually the pitch deck template explained with all the questions that any investor is going to ask. And even if you're not raising money, this would be a great exercise for everybody to go through. This is what an investable company looks like. And by the way, the most investable companies don't need the money. So if you can answer all these questions and just go build a great company, more power to you.
If you're trying to achieve scale, from a process standpoint, is there something that you should do to sit down and actually work through, a certain process or a workshop or something like that?
So it sounds really big to go from ADD to OCD and the rest, but so here's something for everybody that they could do. It's not a tool but it's a quick fix thing to say, just look at your an existing business, right? And congratulations for having an existing business. That's really hard. Most people aren't doing it, and almost nobody understands what that's like. Okay, but just look at your customers and work with your team, and just do an hour this week and say, what do our best customers look like? Just open up the conversation again. We think we have this conversation on, but we don't. What do our best customers look? By the way, you as an owner are going to hear different things than the other people.
Sure.
Right? You're going to have a different definition. It'd be nice if you kind of all heard that. And then do the thing that says, what do our worst customers look like? Get something and say, how about if we stop, if we found one more of the good ones that's awesome, then we wouldn't have to sell one of the bad ones that we'd rather not sell to.
That's so true.
And then the thing can start to move, and the conversation can move. And our brains are locked up in the firefight as entrepreneurs, making payroll. We don't want to say no to anything and uncheck any box. That's a trap.
Greg, that's like the ultimate growth hack. I mean, just to stop down and figure out what those key attributes are of like what your good customers are, and like just
start moving slowly in that direction, and then you lift off. That's what it looks like.
It.
Because nobody's going to say, it's 10% of my customers, I'm going to give away 90% of my customers. Like, it's not going to happen. So how do you, most companies are paying their salespeople to bring in those bad customers. So how about telling your salespeople, we're not going to let those in the door anymore?
Absolutely.
Or just go over there and find those. That'd be great.
You and I are so aligned. This is exactly our team right now. This is a conversation, even our leadership.
Only everybody has this problem, including me.
Yeah, no, this is so great. So, well, hey, Greg, I just want to thank you again for coming on here today. This has been super informative, and appreciate your time. So,
Thanks,
look forward to talking to you soon. All right.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Cheers.